Good morning, class. Settle down. If you could all please take your seats, we have much to get through. I'm Professor Wang Fire, and welcome to the Fire Republic Academy and this semester's class on bending history. Firebending. What is it? It is warmth. It is light. It is life. It is all of these things, yes, but it is also raw power. And for that reason, our history is rife with those who seek to abuse it, to maximize its destructive capabilities so they may rule over the ashes of their creation. One infamous example you may not know of is the rare subtype of firebending academically named detonation bending, but you may know it more colloquially as combustion bending. If you could please get out your notebooks and textbooks, I'm speaking to An Articulate History of Our Nation by Sue Wong, and turn to page 394. Again, I will reiterate, no laptops in my class. No, don't complain, the information does not stick. I've been doing this long enough. Tell me, how far back does combustion bending go? Any of you?
Sheng Shu, the Mirror Queen, supposedly stole a piece of the sun and brought it down to Earth in the Shohan crater, so I was thinking maybe.
Stories, Miss Arca, nothing more. And while stories of immeasurably powerful firebenders can be found in the old legends and myths as far back as history goes, few are little more than speculation. And we are not in the business of speculation here. Archaeologically speaking, combustion bending can only be dated as far back as 486 BG with the Unanimity Project. Who here has heard of that term? No? No one? Fair enough, for a long time the truth was buried, but recent excavations and investigations have exposed what truly happened there. You can actually still visit the facility on Shihai Island, or what's left of it, to see for yourself what they did there. We were considering a school trip. It is, for the most part, a sorry secret of our world's history, though, largely overshadowed by the air nomad genocide, the Taku massacre, the Third Hunt, just recently. But sometimes the smaller stories are more important to remember. Now, the Unanimity Project was orchestrated by the Shang cities. Who here can tell me what they were?
The only 4 cities in the world open to trade with other nations around that time. They were sort of like city-states. There was Jandori, Bin Air, Taku, and... what was the name?
Port Tugark, yes, hot as a five-leg Master Rao. Bin Air and Taku in the Earth Kingdom, Port Tugark in the south, and Jandori here in our homeland. Unlike Taku and Tugark, Jandori did not actually survive to the modern day, but you can still visit the old site. It's just a few islands east of here, and though it may not look like it, it was one of the wealthiest and most prosperous cities in the ancient world in its time. 4 semi-autonomous regions with special legal status, not unlike Republic City today, each of them ruled by zhongdus, appointed for no more than 2 years to ensure none of them ever accumulated too much power or wealth. Or at least that was the theory. But ambition is the sorry child of greed, is it not? By 485 BG, or the 15th year of Yangqin if you're still working on Avatar time, the zhongdus of the Shang cities were rich, they were powerful, and they were looking for ways to keep a hold of what they had. In particular, a name you may actually already know, Zhongdu Chaisi of Zhonduri.
The bureaucrat? I thought she just continued Avatar Seto's reforms after he died. She improved trade and stuff.
Yes, many choose to remember her today as a cunning, brilliant bureaucrat that helped lead our nation through a difficult time, and much of that was true, but history proves more complicated, and I hope today we may challenge that view of her. Chaisi of Janduri and Hinshe of Bin Air's ambitions gave birth to the Unanimity Project. See, Chaisi realized that if she ever wanted to maintain her position, or was ever forced into conflict with the other nations, if she wanted to split off from the Fire Nation, to rule a kingdom of her own, she needed a weapon. She needed benders of her own, and not just any. The Fire Nation military of the day had some of the best in the world. The Earth Kingdom had the numbers, no matter how many mercenaries she hired. No, she needed something more. Now, while Avatar Yangchen's notes suggest that Project Unanimity's inception was sometime before Chaisi's time, it was certainly the case that she was the one to bring it to fruition. Old research notes toyed with the idea of blood bending, but deemed it not destructive enough, then with metal bending, but she dismissed it as impossible, as laughable as that seems now, before settling on the raw power of firebending, of the sun, exploiting it to whatever extreme she could take it, even if she did not know how. While Chai-Si was the political mastermind behind Project Unanimity, providing the funds and the land, at least that's what the evidence suggests, it was a professor by the name of Huan Min-ying that actually orchestrated the experiments in person on the island. Sadly, he was alumni of this very university in which we now stand, another dark mark on our record. Now, officially, all participants in Unanimity were volunteers, but there are too many stories of street urchins and orphans, the unemployed promised opportunity, shelter and work in Canterbury being whisked off the street and off to Shihai Island for that idea to be taken at face value. Some were as young as 6, some even supposedly had infant children of their own, but all of them were firebenders. See, part of the reason this sort of history is so difficult to discern is that so many of our crimes are left as blank pages. We have to read between the lines. We look back on the past now and we can only see the things they wanted us to see. The order, the wealth, the standards of living, but sometimes it is in the interests of those recording to pay little mind to how they got there. So we must figure it out on our own. We must be careful of how we read our own history, what we take at their word, what we take for granted. Wouldn't you want history to look back on you through rose-tinted glasses? See, when the project was eventually uncovered by Avatar Yang Chen and the White Lotus, Chai-Si had almost all of the documents following Min-ying's work destroyed. The facilities were buried underneath lava flow, only recently found. Luckily, we have recovered enough to at least theorize what the first combustion benders as test subjects were put through. Tell me, who here knows how combustion bending works?
I know it means if you get hit in the forehead while bending, you die.
That's how Sokka the inventor killed one.
True, and it is incredibly difficult to study. It is almost entirely theory, given that very few of us will ever see one in our lives. But yes, we tend to believe that control over the material body and immaterial mind is fundamental in some way. And so, Chai-Si, whether she knew the exact lengths the professor went to, had these people taken to their limits and often beyond. They were exposed directly to fire and lava. They were placed in vacuum chambers just to see which ones could survive the longest, clinging by tenuous strings to life. Torture rooms in the ruins suggest that some were kept awake for days on end by slowly dripping water onto their forehead, never allowed to sleep. It may not sound so terrible, but eventually the mind begins to collapse. The water was dripped on the precise spot that they usually get their sixth eye tattoos they are so known for. Why? Scholar Hu Ting suggests this was a crucial step, deconstructing the mind and blurring the line between the real and unreal before it could be rebuilt to be capable of psychic bending, to be reforged into something else, a machine. Other psychic bending techniques have come about from a long life of practice and meditation, even raw talent in the case of the revolutionary equalist Amon, but none have ever acquired these extremes. Now, we can speculate endlessly about what truly happened, about what was necessary to create the combustion benders, but the horrific truth is this. The professor was simply trying everything just to see what might work, throwing everything at the wall and seeing what stuck. What might possibly increase the power of their firebending? It was senseless torture, and death for most of them. The one thing that remains consistent across the few known combustion benders of history is that they lose something of themselves, a limb, their sanity, their ability to speak. Whatever the process is, none are born with the ability. They are forged, and as far as the literature can theorize, it takes something from them. What survived of the facility's notes only detailed one thing that worked: drowning. Repeated near-death experiences by being strapped into cages and thrust into the southern icy waters. Those who survived the cold had to survive long enough underwater to emerge once more. Most did not. There is some evidence to suggest there are psychological components, the ability to kill, to end the life of another person. They ate 3 times as much food as a grown man ever needs, suggesting that they are somehow bleeding chi at a rate unheard of, even today. Whatever they went through, Project Unanimity saw the creation of the first 3 combustion benders, emerging just as unscrupulous and calculating as Chai-Si and the professor themselves. Yang Chen's notes suggest their names were Yingsu, Xiaoyun, and Thapa, though we cannot confirm this. The exact number of victims in Project Unanimity is difficult to calculate. Minying's records count only the successes from each round to the next. But the size of the barracks and the facility, and the archaeological studies of the waste in the area, suggest that it could not have been lower than 300. Some of them as young as 6, some with infants. But the question is, for us, all these years later, why did this happen?
Because the Shang city Zongdas wanted to hold on to power.
Yes, but more than that, Master Midori, deeper. Why did the Shang cities come to be? What economic and social forces create a class of merchants who so wanted to be politically independent and in power that they would do something like this, that led to something like Project Unanimity? History is about forces more than people.
The Platinum Affair in 491 BG. Yang Chen was only 9 years old, so she couldn't do much to stop it. An international trade dispute after other nations funded a rebellion in the Earth Kingdom, and King Fei Shan closed all international ports in revenge. Everyone else did the same not long after. Then they opened the 4 Shang cities.
Almost perfect, Miss Uneru. It was a cold, untrusting time in the world. Yes, you're right that General Nong led an uprising against Earth King Faishan, and other nations supported the rebel with shipments of platinum and unbendable, deliciously rare material, but not that Faishan closed the ports solely out of spite. No. See, while, let's be honest, monarchs have not had the best track record of rational policy making, if we look at the broader historical context at the time, we can see that the Shang cities may have truly been more of a calculated move in the Earth Kingdom's internal politics than international politics. Harvest and tax records suggest General Nong's uprising was not one of the many, many peasant uprisings in the Earth Federation's history, but one of political opportunity. At the time, Omashu operated an international trade empire that afforded it a substantial level of political autonomy, and while Ba Sing Se was stable, it was not keeping up economically. And General Nong's private writings, well, they suggest he wanted to see Omashu succeed Ba Sing Se as the center of Earth Kingdom power. And this age-old competition between the sister cities continues to this day, does it not, in the much less violent avenues of sporting competitions. Go the Turtle Hawks, I say. But to the surprise of everyone, Faishan was victorious in that, and yes, he did close the ports, but as Su Wong writes, the king still loved Fire Nation pepper, and the Fire Lord still made his cloaks from Omashu silk. So, they created the Shang cities to handle all of the international trade. Politically, this accomplished a few things for Faishan. This way, they weren't technically trading with the rest of the world and spiting them, but the Shang cities also cut Omashu trade off at its knees. See, let's actually take a look at the map. Where were Taku and Bin Er located, the 2 Shang cities in the Earth Kingdom? Strategically, they were chosen in the northwest regions of the Earth Kingdom, far away from Omashu, forcing their international trade to pass a long way across the continent before it could ever leave port, before it could ever make any money. The Earth King would have known that it would have been far more practical to use the Southern Passage, passing right by Omashu, as much of the trade moves today, but placing the Shang cities in the northwest made their silk, their products, far less competitive, and it gave Faishan direct control over Omashu's profits. Sure enough, Omashu's wealth saw a sharp decline during the Shang era, and Faishan solidified his grip on power. But as with every decision, it has unforeseen consequences, one of which was the rise of these semi-autonomous regions with a taste for power, wealth, and independence, and because of that, we could say combustion bending grew out of Earth Kingdom politics like a weed, as an expression of that. But what was Lady Chai-Se to do with her 3 combustion benders? These powerful pie show pieces the Shang cities suddenly had on the board. They were not ready to bring them out into the open just yet, but Avatar Yang Chen's latent diaries, preserved in the Nomad Museum of Omashu, record Zhongdu Hinshi saying, quote, If we bring Project Unanimity into play, neither the Earth King nor the Avatar will have power over us. We'll have complete impunity. The Earth King will sign any charter we want him to sign. We'll be able to rewrite the laws of Omashu if we feel like. Again, we see these themes of the Earth Kingdom politics dominating the decisions of players in this scenario. That rivalry between Ba Sing Se and Omashu, and the Shang cities want to become players in Earth Kingdom politics in their own right. So they were thinking they could break themselves off, they could become independent, fight a war to take what they felt was theirs before the powers that be took them down. And I see you all now. I see you all shaking your heads, narrowing your eyes. How dare they start a war? How dare they throw the world out of balance? Because there have always been 4 nations, you cry, as if that means anything beyond a political slogan. But tell me, why were there 4 nations? Why based around each of the elements? Political scientists have pondered this question for centuries. Ethnicity, unity, philosophy, all sorts of answers. There is no single one, but the story of Project Unanimity exposes a terrible truth about our world. Think about how difficult it was for Republic City to carve itself a place in the world, or how the 5th nation was crushed before it could ever flourish. Up until the invention of modern firearms and advanced electrical weapons, bending was unrivaled. Not by crossbows or spearmen or any martial formation, a good bender was a match for them all. The 4 nations divided along the lines of those who could take power for themselves and their kin. It's only because of technological advancement that the splinter states exist today at all. The Unanimity Project was another bloody chapter in that story, using bending to grab at power in the world. Some historians suggest the Shang cities were beacons of republicanism in the old world. The Minister for Territorial Relations at the time is quoted saying, "A Zhongdu is like a modern-day avatar. They serve others in their time in one of the few important positions in this world granted by means other than bloodline. I dreamed of a place where opportunity could be reaped by anyone with the will to sow, and this is it." Clearly, they saw their little kingdoms as enclaves of ingenuity and liberty and republicanism compared to the rest of the world, where you would not be murdered or imprisoned simply for speaking out against the king, or that you would not starve simply because the king decided to hoard grain one winter. Perhaps they were right in some respect. We see their flaws vividly, but we are blessed now to live in republics and federations with constitutional protections and a court we can trust. No summary executions in the streets or secret police, at least not here in our republic. But that was not always the case. On the other hand, we should not separate the Shang cities from the horrors they funded and perpetrated. No. And as Su Wong suggests, perhaps they simply exchanged one tyrant for another, richer tyrant. A king by blood to a king by gold. Peasants were rarely permitted to leave the Shang cities. They were brought in on low wages, often not enough to live on. Riots would be brutally suppressed, and so long as the Fire Lord or Earth King got their dues, they did not seem to care. I am more convinced of the latter. I think people tend to colour parts of history like these a little too brightly. They want to imagine them as better than they were. Our world has been forged from beauty, from people talking to each other, from those holding true to their oaths. Yes, all of those things, but it has also been built on immense suffering, much of it undeserved, most of it forgotten. And we must remember that. I'll be interested to see your perspective in the midterm essays. Interestingly, it was not Zhongdu Chaisei that used the combustion benders for the first time, but Henshe of Benair. This is also why Chaisei has been, for a long time, remembered well in our history. Her ruthlessness has been forgotten. It wasn't until the last few decades we uncovered her involvement. After the Earth King threatened to raze Benair to the ground and remove Henshe as Zhongdu, with the city falling apart around him, the 3 were brought in to level the playing field. Exactly what happened that night in Benair is unclear. There are conflicting historical sources. King Faishan's investigation suggests they may have been killed in a devastating explosion. Combustion benders have been prone to that historically. Stories from locals suggest the spirits were involved somehow, though they did not seem aware of the existence of these combustion benders, so they may be simply trying to explain away what they did not know. Chaisei's records, however, echo these peasant rumors, possibly to cover up her own involvement. Are there any questions?
Is it true that the government knows how to make combustion benders but just keeps it a secret because they think it's too powerful?
Miss Unero, I'm afraid I am not aware of any secret like that, but you are welcome to make a Freedom of Information Act request. The most curious detail about that night, though, is Yang Chen's own account, because it seems to be a lie. Her diaries omit any mention of the combustion benders at all in Benia, despite the fact we know that she knew about them now, insisting it was also somehow the spirits. This was certainly the lie she told Earth King Faishan. It was only decades later in life that she mentions them indirectly. Su Wong suggests Yang Chen was purposefully vague about the details because of something she did. Perhaps she too had something to hide, or she was wary of their power falling into the wrong hands. After all, while the Fire Lord denied any official involvement, there is some evidence to suggest that he did know something of it. That perhaps he thought he could control these new weapons when they came to be, and that he could put Chaisei aside. While for a long time we thought the 3 first combustion benders vanished in the wake of the Benia incident, recent geological evidence around the Northern Air Temple suggests that they not only survived as prisoners of the White Lotus, but that Yang Chen herself wished to hide their existence from the world entirely. There are valleys, you can go see them, with craters that ought not to be there, with a strange regularity. Similar sites were found on the southern continent where we know the 3 were originally trained. I know I have been critical of the Avatar in the past, but here I believe they showed some wisdom. After all, if Henshi could fight the Avatar and control an entire city with just 3, what could the Fire Lord do with an army of them? Did the world have the right to know about the danger, though? These are questions we must consider. Whatever unanimity did to create those first 3 combustion benders all those years ago, it is perhaps right that those secrets were lost to history, that we should not try to uncover them. Too many have tried to recreate their methods. In most cases, such attempts end in death, all in a desperate bid for power. It's always power. Need I remind you of the recent attacks in Agnar Kell just a few years ago? The world is a dangerous place. Perhaps Yang Chen hoped to hide the truth, believing it too potent, too dangerous, and mayhaps she was right. Whatever happened to them beyond their imprisonment is speculation, and we do not deal in speculation. I expect the thesis statement to be on my desk within the next week, formal writing only, and please read the chapter on bending as social mobility. Class dismissed.